You thought you could humiliate me? Please, I didn't mean for this. You are nothing.
Simone, stop this!
For 6 years, everyone in this city has known me as the quiet wife of Julian Cho, the man who runs Cho Holdings like a machine of glass and steel. Soft-spoken. Always in the kitchen before the housekeeper arrives. Always in bed before he gets home. What none of them know is that before I was Simone Cho, I was Simone Reyes. And the name Reyes still opens doors in this city that Julian Cho's money could never touch. My father built an empire out of blood and silence, and when he died, he left it to the one child who understood that power isn't loud. It's patient. I buried that name the day I married Julian. I told myself love was worth more than an empire. I told myself a lot of things in those early years, that quiet meant peaceful, that small meant safe, that the version of myself I built to fit inside his world was still, somewhere underneath, entirely mine. I believed it long enough to plant a garden in the backyard of a house I never fully owned. Long enough to learn the names of his business partners' wives, to host dinners where I said almost nothing, and was praised afterward for being such a gracious hostess. Long enough to give birth to a son and decide, in the exhausted, tender hours after, that I would rather be forgotten by the world than be anything other than fully present for him. 6 years is a long time to practice disappearing. Long enough that I nearly forgot I used to be someone people were afraid of. Tonight, I found out exactly what my patience had been buying him. I heard the garage door first, then his voice, low, easy, the same voice he used to use on me when we were young enough to still believe in each other. Then a second voice, a woman's laugh, bright and careless, echoing off the marble in my foyer like she already owned it. I came down the stairs in my robe, hair still damp, and there she was, Brianna Vance, 26. His new executive assistant, apparently, though from the way her hand rested on his lower back, her job description had clearly expanded. "Simone!" Julian didn't even have the decency to look surprised. "You're up! It's my house, Julian! Where else would I be?" Brianna's smile didn't waver. She looked me over the way people look over furniture they're planning to replace. "You must be the wife," she said. "Julian's told me so much about you. He said you're restful. Restful. As if I were a pillow he set aside when he got tired of sleeping on it. I made up the guest room for her," Julian said, like that was a kindness. She had a late night at the office. It made sense for her to just stay. I looked at my son's photograph on the hallway table. Caleb was upstairs asleep, 8 years old, still believing his father hung the moon. I looked at the dining room, where I'd eaten dinner alone 4 nights this week, while Julian claimed later and later hours downtown. I looked at this woman, standing in my house in a blouse that still smelled like his cologne. And something in me that had been sleeping for 6 years finally opened its eyes. "Sit," I said. "Both of you. Let's have a real conversation." Julian frowned, the first genuine reaction he'd given me all night. He wasn't used to me giving instructions. I wasn't used to giving them either, not in this house, not in this life. But some instincts don't get buried. They only get quiet. Brianna sat first, delighted, like this was entertainment. Julian sat slower, wary now, watching me the way you watch weather that's changed too fast. "Julian," I said, "how long has this been going on?" "Simone, don't make this a scene. How long?" Brianna answered for him, chin lifted, proud of herself. 8 months. "And honestly, he was going to leave you months ago. I told him he didn't need to keep pretending for someone so." She waved a hand at me, at my robe, at my bare face. Unremarkable. I let the words sit in the room. Unremarkable. My mother used to say the most dangerous people in any room are the ones everyone forgets to watch. "You brought your mistress into my home," I said quietly. Sat her at my table. Let her sleep under the roof where my son sleeps. "And you thought I'd what, cry? Beg you to stay?" "I thought you'd understand," Julian said. "You've never exactly been the passionate type, Simone." I needed someone who I stood up, both hands flat on the table, and I flipped it. Glass shattered. Brianna screamed and scrambled back, wine soaking into the white blouse she'd clearly borrowed from my closet's aesthetic without asking. Julian jumped to his feet, face red, more shocked by the noise than by anything I'd said. "Have you lost your mind?" he shouted. "No," I said. I found it. I misplaced it 6 years ago when I decided being your wife mattered more than being myself. Comment, I flipped the table if you've ever wanted to do this in your own kitchen. You need help, Julian said, backing toward Brianna like she was suddenly the reasonable one in the room. This isn't you. You have no idea who I am, I said. That's the whole problem, Julian. You built a life next to a woman for 6 years and never once asked who she used to be before you. Enough theatrics. He straightened his jacket, regaining that boardroom composure he wore like armor. Fine! You caught us! What do you want, Simone? A bigger settlement? A public apology? Name it and let's be done with this. I want, I said, for you to understand exactly what you just did. He laughed, short and humorless. And what's that? You brought a stranger into a house that isn't just mine on paper. You humiliated me in front of someone I've never met, in front of my own son's home, and you did it thinking there would be no consequences. Because you think you know exactly what I am. A quiet woman who paints in the afternoons and signs whatever you put in front of her. That's what you are. That's what I let you believe, I said. Because for 6 years, I thought loving you meant staying small. I was wrong. I picked up my phone off the counter and dialed a number I hadn't used since my wedding day. It rang twice. Miss Reyes, the voice on the other end said. Careful. Reverent. A voice that hadn't spoken to me in 6 years but hadn't forgotten how. It's been a long time. Julian's face changed the second the name left my mouth. Reyes. He knew that name. Everyone in this city with real money knew that name, the way you know the name of a hurricane that flattened the coast 20 years ago and never quite got rebuilt the same. Marcus, I said, not the assistant across from me, but my father's old lieutenant, the man who'd run my organization's daily operations while I played house. I need everything on Julian Cho's business. Every account, every shell company, every debt he's hiding from his board. Tonight, Julian's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Simone, Brianna said, uncertain now, glancing between us. Who is that? Who are you talking to? Someone who's worked for my family since before you were born, I said. Julian found his voice. You're bluffing. The Reyes family, your father died. That whole operation collapsed years ago. Everyone knows that. Everyone was supposed to know that, I said. I let them believe it. Do you know how much power you can hold on to when the entire world thinks you're gone, Julian? No one guards against a ghost. I watched something crack behind his eyes. 6 years of thinking he'd married beneath him, and now the ground under his feet had turned out to be an ocean he never knew he was standing over. You're the Mafia queen, he said slowly, like the words tasted like a lie even as he said them. I'm the Mafia queen, I confirmed. And you just brought your mistress into my house and called me unremarkable. Brianna's laugh had died completely. She looked at Julian like he'd lied to her about something far more important than a wife. He told me you were nothing, she said quietly. He told me you'd take the settlement and disappear. He told himself that too, I said. It's the only way men like Julian sleep at night. They convince themselves the woman across the table is smaller than she actually is. Julian's composure snapped back into place, the way it always did in a crisis cold. Calculating, already 3 moves ahead in his head. Fine. You have money. Old family money nobody can touch because it's buried under 30 layers of shell corporations. Congratulations. That doesn't change anything about tonight. You're still my wife. You still have no legal standing to do anything to my company. You misunderstand, I said. I'm not going to touch your company legally. I'm going to touch it the way my father taught me to touch things. Quietly. Completely. And there won't be a lawyer alive who can undo it. Is that a threat? It's a forecast. I turned to Brianna. You should leave. Whatever he's promised you, know that it was never his to give. Every asset in his name that you think you're going to inherit a piece of, I own the debt behind half of it already. I've owned it for years. I just never called it in. Her face went pale. You knew? About tonight, about us, you already. I've known for 4 months, I said. I let it play out because I wanted to see how far he'd go, and because some part of me needed to know exactly how little I meant to him before I let myself act on it. Now I know. Both things. She grabbed her bag and left without another word, heels clicking too fast across my marble floor, out into the night. Smart woman. She recognized a sinking ship faster than the man who'd built it. Julian and I stood alone in the wreckage of the dining table, wine soaking into the rug my mother had given me before she died, before I buried her name along with my own. "So what now?" he said. "You destroy me? Take my company? Leave me with nothing, the way people like you always do?" "People like me don't take everything," I said. "We take exactly what's owed. There's a difference, Julian. You should have learned that before you decided I was too soft to notice." The next morning, I sat in a conference room I hadn't set foot in for 6 years. My old team, the ones who'd stayed loyal through every year, I'd stepped back to play at being an ordinary wife filed in one by one, older now, more careful, but unmistakably relieved. "Miss Reyes," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. "Cho Holdings, full breakdown. Julian Cho's empire, on paper, looked untouchable. Real estate across 3 states. A logistics arm that moved freight up and down the coast. A board of 12 men who'd never once questioned where his early capital had come from, because questioning Julian Cho had never been profitable. What they didn't know, what Julian himself had conveniently forgotten to remember, was that his very first infusion of capital, 11 years ago, before I'd ever met him, had come from a loan brokered through a company my father owned 3 layers deep. Julian hadn't built his empire from nothing. He'd built it on my family's money and never known it. "He's been paying interest on that loan to a shell corporation for 11 years, Marcus said. "Automatic transfers. He probably doesn't even remember it exists." "He wouldn't," I said. "Men like Julian only remember the money they think they earned. You want to call the loan? Not yet." I flipped through the folder, watching the architecture of his life laid bare in front of me, every weakness, every overextension, every asset he'd leveraged twice, thinking no one was counting. I want to understand exactly how deep this goes before I decide how it ends. The deeper I read, the clearer the picture became. Julian wasn't just unfaithful. He was drowning. 3 failed developments in the last 2 years, quietly absorbed by refinancing he didn't disclose to his board. A logistics division bleeding money to cover the gap. And Brianna Vance, it turned out, wasn't just his mistress. She was the daughter of a competitor, planted months ago to feed information to a rival firm circling Cho Holdings like a shark that could smell blood before the wound even opened. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd let a stranger walk through his front door with a knife already in her hand, and he'd been too busy admiring her to notice. That evening, Julian came home to find his mother waiting in the living room. Eleanor Cho had never liked me, not because of anything I'd done, but because I hadn't been born into the right kind of family, or so she'd always believed. If only she knew. "Simone!" Eleanor said, rising the moment I walked in, her voice already sharpened for battle. "Julian told me everything. About your little scene last night. About this fantasy you've apparently decided to indulge that you're some kind of criminal mastermind. It's not a fantasy, Eleanor. Don't be absurd. You're a housewife who paints watercolors and reads too many novels. I won't have you embarrassing this family with delusions." I set my bag down slowly. "Would you like to see the wire transfer records for the loan that funded Julian's first development? The one with your name listed as guarantor in case he defaulted? Because I have them. And I know you never told him you signed that, did you, Eleanor? You didn't want him to know how much you'd risked. How much you still owe." Her face went the color of the pearls around her neck. "That's not how would you even have access to, because the company that holds that debt is mine," I said. "It's always been mine. I bought it 4 years ago, when I first started wondering whether my husband's family loved me or simply tolerated me for as long as I stayed useful and quiet." Julian, who had come in behind his mother, froze in the doorway. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was answer enough. "You never told him," I said softly, "that you mortgaged your own house to cover his first failed deal. That the reason he's never had to explain his losses to the board is because you've been quietly bailing him out for a decade, and I've been quietly holding the paper on every dollar of it." "You're lying," Julian said. "My mother wouldn't." "Ask her," I said. He turned to Eleanor. And in her face, the tightness, the refusal to meet his eyes, he found his answer. His mother, the woman who'd spent 6 years telling him he'd married beneath his station, had spent a decade quietly propping up his failures and never once telling him the truth. "You've both been living inside a house I could collapse with a single phone call," I said. "I just never made the call." because I wanted, foolishly, for this family to be real. Then don't make it, Julian said, and for the first time in years, I heard something in his voice that wasn't calculation. Fear. Simone. Whatever this is, whatever you've built, whatever you're capable of, we have a son. Don't do this because of Brianna. She meant nothing. She meant enough for you to bring her home, I said. Enough for you to let her call me unremarkable at my own table while you sat there and said nothing. I'll fix it. I'll fire her. I'll do whatever you don't understand yet, I said, that this was never about fixing it. This is about you finally learning what you married. Caleb found me in the garden the next morning, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up the way it did every morning since he was small enough for me to carry. Mum, he said, climbing into the chair across from me. Dad said you're mad at him. Is it because of the lady? Children hear everything. They just pretend not to. The same way adults pretend children don't understand more than they let on. I'm not mad, baby, I said. I'm just done pretending things were fine when they weren't. Grandma said you're going to take everything from Dad, that you're going to make us poor. There it was, Eleanor, already working the angles, already turning my own son against me before I'd finished my coffee. I should have expected it. Desperate people reach for whatever weapon is closest, and an 8-year-old's fear is an easy one to pick up. Do you believe that? I asked him. Caleb picked at the hem of his sleeve, not looking at me. I don't know. Dad said you're not really who you say you are, that you've been lying to us. I felt something in my chest tighten, not anger, something closer to grief. My son, weaponized without even understanding he was being used, repeating his father's fear back to me like a script he'd been handed. I have been keeping a secret, I said honestly, but not the kind that hurts you. I used to run a very big business, before you were born, before I met your dad. I stopped, because I wanted a quiet life for you. I've never lied about loving you. That part was always true. Then why is everyone so scared of you now? Because for a long time, I let people believe I was small, I said. And people who realize they were wrong about that tend to get scared. That's not your fault, and it's not really about you at all. He was quiet for a while. Watching the birds at the feeder his father had never once refilled in 3 years of living here. Are you going to leave? He asked finally. I don't know yet, I said, but wherever I go, you're coming with me. That part isn't a question. He nodded slowly, like a boy trying to hold on to certainty in a house where all the adults around him had turned out to be something other than what they claimed. I hated Julian more in that moment than I had the entire night before, wine-soaked and furious over a flipped table. Not for the affair. For teaching our son to be afraid of his own mother. Julian tried a different approach that night. He came to my study with a bottle of wine and the practiced softness he used to close deals worth 9 figures. I've been thinking, he said, about us, about what you told me. And I think we can rebuild something real if you let us. I made a mistake with Brianna, a stupid, selfish mistake. But whatever you are, whoever you were before me, that doesn't erase 6 years of marriage. You're right, I said. It doesn't erase them. It clarifies them. He sat across from me, close enough that I could smell the same cologne Brianna's blouse had carried the night I flipped the table. Let's start over, he said. Combine what you have with what I have. My company, your resources, Simone. Do you understand what we could build together? We wouldn't just be powerful. We'd be untouchable. There it was. Not remorse. Arithmetic. You're not asking me to stay because you love me, I said. You're asking because you finally understand what I'm worth, and you'd rather own half of it than lose all of it. That's not, Julian, I've spent my entire life around men who calculate love in terms of leverage. I recognize the math when I hear it. He didn't deny it. He just watched me, waiting to see which version of me would answer the wife who'd forgiven him 100 small cruelties over 6 years, or the woman who'd just proven she never needed to. I'll give you a choice, I said finally. Sign the divorce papers my lawyer sends tomorrow. Walk away with your name and your pride intact. Or don't, and I start calling in every debt your family has quietly owed mine for the last decade, starting with the loan that built your very first development. You'd really do that. Bankrupt your own son's father. I'd really do what you forced me to do, I said. There's a difference, Julian. I didn't choose this fight. You brought it into my house and sat it down at my table. He didn't sign. Instead, 2 days later, a courier delivered an envelope to my study. Inside was a custody filing Julian's lawyer, requesting an emergency hearing to determine Caleb's living arrangements, citing, in language so cold it barely sounded like it was about my son at all, concerns regarding the mother's undisclosed associations and their potential risk to the minor child's safety and reputation. I read it twice, standing in the same spot where I'd flipped the table 5 nights earlier, and felt something in me go very still and very cold. I called Julian directly instead of routing it through lawyers. He answered on the second ring, already defensive, like he'd been waiting for the call. "Don't act surprised," he said. "You basically confirmed you're the head of a criminal organization in my own living room. Any judge in this state would side with me the second that comes up in a hearing." "You're using our son as leverage," I said. "After everything you did this week, this is the move you decided to make. I'm protecting him. You're punishing me," I said. "And you've decided the fastest way to do it is to make Caleb afraid of losing his mother. Do you have any idea what that will do to him, regardless of how the hearing goes? You should have thought about that before you turned our marriage into a business war. You started the business war the moment you brought a stranger into our house," I said. I simply refused to lose it. "But this, Julian, listen to me very carefully. I have spent 6 years choosing not to use everything I have access to. If you take this to a courtroom, that changes. Is that a threat too?" "It's the truth," I said. "You want a judge to weigh my undisclosed associations. Fine, I'll bring my own disclosures. Every account Vantage Meridian holds paper on, every asset your mother mortgaged behind your back, every dollar Meridian Freight funneled to your assistant, while she was feeding them your internal numbers, all of it becomes public record the moment you make my history relevant in a courtroom. You'll win a filing, Julian. You'll lose the company, your mother's house, and whatever's left of your reputation in the process. Is that really the trade you want to make for a custody hearing you're not even confident you'll win?" Silence stretched long enough that I could hear him breathing on the other end. "You'd really do that," he said finally. "Drag Caleb through all of it just to prove a point. I'm not the one who filed the paperwork, Julian. I'm just telling you exactly what happens if you don't withdraw it by tomorrow morning." He withdrew it by tomorrow morning. But the filing had already done its damage in the one place I couldn't undo it with a phone call Caleb had overheard the lawyers on speaker through his father's office door, and came to me that night with a question no 8-year-old should ever have to ask his own mother. "Is Dad trying to take me away?" I sat on the edge of his bed and held both his hands, the way I used to when he was small enough to fit against my chest during thunderstorms. "No one is taking you anywhere," I said. "Not your father, not anyone. I promise you that. But he said things about you, to the lawyer. I heard him." "Your father is scared," I said, "and scared people say things to try to feel powerful again. It doesn't make those things true, and it doesn't mean you have to be scared too. That's my job, not yours." "Are you going to hurt him?" Caleb asked. "Because of what he did?" It was, I realized, the most important question anyone had asked me all week. "No," I said. "I'm going to make sure he can never use you against me again. That's different from hurting him. I need you to understand the difference, because one day you're going to be old enough to decide what kind of powerful person you want to be. And I want you to choose the second kind." He nodded slowly, and for the first time since the night of the flipped table, he let me hold him the way he used to let me hold him before his father taught him to be afraid of half his own family. Comment, "That's my job, not yours, if you know a mother who's had to say something like that." 3 days later, at Cho Holdings' quarterly board meeting, Julian stood in front of 12 men who'd trusted him with their capital for over a decade, unaware that the woman who owned the paper behind half his empire was sitting quietly in the gallery seats, unnoticed, the way I'd learned to be unnoticed my entire life. The presentation started well enough. Numbers up here, projections up there, the kind of polished performance Julian had always been good at. It was only when the CFO reached the debt disclosures slide that things began to unravel. "There's a discrepancy," one board member said, frowning at his tablet. "This says the original development loan was refinanced under a holding company called Vantage Meridian." "Who controls Vantage Meridian?" Julian's easy smile flickered. "It's a routine financing partner, nothing unusual. It's asking for immediate repayment of the full principal," another board member said, scrolling. Effective this morning. That's Julian. That's $40 million, due in 90 days. I watched Julian's face drain of color in real time. He hadn't checked his notices that morning. He'd been too busy trying to talk his way back into my bed the night before to notice that the ground beneath his company had already started to move. "There must be an error," he said, but his voice had lost its polish. I stood up. "There's no error," I said. The room turned toward me, 12 unfamiliar faces trying to place who I was and why I was speaking. Vantage Meridian is one of my holding companies. I called the loan this morning. "Simone!" Julian said, low, urgent. "Not here. You wanted to know what I was capable of," I said. "This is a small demonstration." The board chairman looked between us, confusion turning slowly into understanding. "You're Mr. Cho's wife. I'm the majority creditor behind nearly a third of this company's original capital structure," I said. "I have been for years." I let it sit quietly, because I believed in the marriage more than I believed in the leverage. I no longer have reason to make that distinction. "This is insane," Julian said, turning to his board. "She's trying to sabotage the company out of spite. This is a domestic dispute, not a financial matter. It became a financial matter the moment your development loan came due," I said calmly. "I didn't create that obligation, Julian. You did, 11 years ago, and never bothered to learn the terms." One of the board members, older, sharper than the rest, leaned forward. "Miss Reyes, did you say Reyes?" "Yes." Recognition moved across his face like a slow tide coming in. "As in the Reyes family." "As in," I confirmed. The room went silent in the particular way rooms go silent when powerful men realize they've been standing next to something far larger than themselves without ever noticing. "If the company cannot produce $40 million in 90 days, I continued, the collateral reverts to Vantage Meridian. That includes the logistics division, 2 of the 3 commercial properties in the downtown portfolio, and the naming rights to this building. I've had my legal team draw up the full transfer schedule already. You're welcome to review it." "You planned this," Julian said, voice cracking now, the calculated calm finally gone. "You've been planning this for years." "No," I said. "I've been protecting this family for years, quietly, the way I was taught to protect what's mine. I only started planning 3 nights ago, when you brought a stranger into my home and told her I was unremarkable." I turned to the board. "Gentlemen, I have no interest in destroying a company that employs several thousand people who had nothing to do with my husband's personal failures. I'm prepared to restructure the debt on reasonable terms with new leadership." The chairman's eyebrows lifted. "New leadership?" Julian Cho built this company on capital he never understood he was borrowing from a family he spent 6 years disrespecting, I said. "I don't believe he's earned the right to keep running it into the ground." Julian did not go quietly into that board meeting's aftermath. Men like him rarely do. 2 days after the vote was scheduled, I got a call from Marcus warning me that Julian had spent the weekend meeting with a reporter from one of the city's business dailies, the kind of reporter who specialized in turning private wars into public spectacle. "He's trying to get ahead of the story," Marcus said. "Paint himself as the victim of a hostile takeover by and I'm quoting the draft headline here, shadowy heiress with organized crime ties. He's planning to leak it the morning of the shareholder vote." I almost laughed. "He thinks calling me a criminal is going to save him. He's betting the board gets spooked." That respectable men don't want their names next to the word Mafia in a headline, regardless of which side of the story they're standing on. He wasn't entirely wrong to try it. Fear is a powerful lever, and Julian had spent his whole career learning how to pull it. What he hadn't learned, what men who inherit comfort instead of earning it through danger never learn, is that fear only works on people who don't already know exactly what they're afraid of. I called the reporter myself the next morning. "Miss Reyes," she said, surprised, when my assistant patched the call through. "I wasn't expecting you to reach out directly. You're writing a story about a hostile takeover," I said. "I'd rather you write an accurate one than a borrowed one. Mr. Cho described you as." "I know what he described me as. Ask me the questions you actually want answered instead." She did. I answered every one of them plainly, my maiden name, my father's history, the loan that had funded Julian's first development, the decade of quiet debt his own mother had carried without ever telling him. I didn't dress any of it up, and I didn't need to. The truth, laid out cleanly, was more damning to Julian than any rumor he could have planted about me. The story ran 2 days before the vote. The headline wasn't about a shadowy heiress. It was about a CEO who had built an empire on capital he never understood, married into a family he'd spent 6 years underestimating, and brought his mistress home to insult the woman quietly holding the paper on half his company's foundation. By the time the board convened, Julian's counterattack had done exactly the opposite of what he'd intended. It hadn't painted me as dangerous. It had painted him as a man who never once thought to ask who he'd actually married. There was one more piece of the story Julian never saw coming, and it had nothing to do with him at all. 2 weeks after the board vote, a man I didn't recognize requested a meeting through my office. Richard Vance, Brianna's father, CEO of a logistics firm called Meridian Freight that had spent the last year quietly circling Cho Holdings, waiting for an opening to buy up its most valuable routes at a discount. I understood immediately why his daughter had taken a job as Julian's assistant. It was never about Julian at all. It was reconnaissance. Richard sat across from me in my office, composed in the way men are composed right up until the moment they realize they've badly misjudged the person across the table. "I'll be direct," he said. "My daughter made a personal error in judgment getting involved with Mr. Cho. That's unrelated to business. I'd like to discuss a fair acquisition of the logistics division now that it's under new ownership." "Your daughter's personal error in judgment," I said, "was working for a rival firm while sleeping with the CEO of the company she was embedded in, feeding you internal financials for the better part of 8 months. That's not unrelated to business, Richard. That's the entire business." His composure flickered, just slightly. "I don't know what you think, you." "I have the transfer logs," I said. Emails routed through a personal account she thought was untraceable. It wasn't difficult to find once I started looking. Your daughter was careless in exactly the way people are careless when they've never once been caught. What do you want? I want you to understand that the same debt structure I used to take, Cho Holdings applies, in smaller measure, to Meridian Freight. You took a loan 4 years ago to expand your fleet. You routed it through a broker who, as it happens, works almost exclusively with capital connected to my family. You didn't check who was standing behind your own money either, Richard. Nobody in this city ever does. He went very quiet. "I'm not interested in destroying your company," I said. "I am interested in you understanding that corporate espionage conducted through your own daughter is the kind of mistake that, in my father's world, used to end careers far more permanently than a bad headline. I'd like us to remain civil. But that depends entirely on you never underestimating what I'm capable of again." He left without the acquisition he'd come for, and Meridian Freight quietly withdrew every bid it had circling Cho Holdings' remaining assets within the month. Brianna, I heard later, had been sent to manage a regional office 3 states away, as far from the center of anything as her father could arrange without technically firing his own daughter. 2 schemers, in the same 8 months, had both made the identical mistake. They had looked at a quiet woman standing slightly behind the men they were actually trying to outmaneuver and decided she wasn't worth calculating into the plan at all. The vote happened 2 weeks later, though by then it barely qualified as a vote. Julian's own board, faced with the choice between an orderly transition and a hostile debt call that would gut the company overnight, chose the transition. He was removed as CEO with a severance package that felt, to him, like an insult, and to everyone who'd watched him operate for the last decade, like mercy. Brianna Vance's real employer, the rival firm that had planted her quietly severed ties the moment word got out that the woman she'd been feeding information to was married to the majority creditor of the company she was trying to poach intelligence from. She'd been so busy playing one game that she never noticed she'd wandered into a much older, much larger one. Eleanor Cho called me once, in the weeks after, not to apologize but to ask, in a voice stripped of all its old superiority, whether the house, the one she'd quietly mortgaged a decade ago to keep her son afloat, was still safe. "It's safe," I told her. I never wanted to hurt Caleb's family. I wanted his father to understand that the woman he married was never the smallest person in the room. "You could have told us," she said, "who you really were, from the beginning." "I tried," I said. "For 6 years, I tried to be seen as more than restful furniture. Nobody in your family ever asked the right question. You all just assumed you already knew the answer." Julian came to see me one last time at the house that was now, by every legal definition, entirely mine. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in the way a man looks smaller once the story he's been telling himself about his own importance finally collapses. "I lost everything," he said. "The company, the board's respect. Half my friends stopped returning my calls the moment the news broke." "You lost a version of yourself that was never real," I said. "The rest, you still have. You have a son who still wants his father to be someone worth looking up to. That part's still yours to build, if you want it. Do you hate me?" I thought about it honestly, the way I hadn't let myself think about anything honestly in 6 years. "No," I said. "I think you married a woman you never bothered to actually meet. That's not hatred. That's just a very expensive kind of carelessness." "Would things have been different?" he asked. "If I'd known from the start? Who you really were?" "I don't know," I said. "But I know you'll never get the chance to find out, because you didn't respect the woman you thought I was enough to stay faithful to her. Knowing my last name wouldn't have fixed that. It would have just made you afraid of the wrong thing instead of ashamed of the right one." He left that night without another word, and for the first time in 6 years, the house felt like it belonged entirely to the people who deserved to be in it, me, and the small boy upstairs who was slowly learning that his mother had never once been unremarkable. She had simply been patient, in the specific and dangerous way that powerful women often are, right up until the exact moment patience stopped being worth the cost. I never went looking for the crown my father left me. I buried it because I thought love meant setting power down. What I learned, sitting in the wreckage of a flipped table and a shattered marriage, is that real love was never supposed to require me to disappear. I am Simone Reyes. I was the Mafia queen long before I was ever anyone's wife, and I will be the Mafia queen long after his name has stopped meaning anything at all. He didn't know who he was living with. Now the whole city does. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of a building that used to carry Julian's name in brushed steel letters above the entrance. It carries mine now, not the Reyes name, which still opens doors best left unopened, but a new one I chose for exactly this purpose. Meridian Grove Holdings. Clean. Unremarkable, if you didn't know any better. I'd learned, finally, how to make that word work for me instead of against me. Cho Holdings didn't disappear the way people expected it to. I restructured it, kept the employees who'd built their careers there in good faith, replaced the leadership that had spent a decade covering for Julian's blind spots, and quietly folded its most valuable divisions into a company that now answered only to me. The building still stands downtown. The people who work in it have never once had to explain to their families why their paychecks bounced, the way they nearly did the year their old CEO was too busy managing a Mistress to manage a balance sheet. Julian moved to a smaller city 2 states away, the kind of place where nobody recognizes the name Cho and asks what happened to the empire it used to be attached to. He calls Caleb every Sunday. Sometimes the calls run long and warm, and I hear my son laughing through his bedroom door in a way that reminds me he's still allowed to love his father. Even now, even after everything. Sometimes the calls run short and stilted, and Caleb comes down afterward, quieter than usual, and I don't ask him to explain it. I just sit with him until the quiet passes. I never told Caleb the full weight of what I am. Not yet. He knows his mother is powerful, that people are careful around her in a way they aren't careful around other people's mothers, and for now, at 8 years old, that's enough truth for him to carry. One day, when he's older, I'll tell him the rest about his grandfather, about the name Reyes, about the specific, patient kind of strength it takes to sit quietly at a dinner table for 6 years, absorbing insult after insult, waiting for the exact moment when patience stops being a virtue and starts being a weapon. Eleanor Cho still calls occasionally, mostly to ask after Caleb, sometimes to say things that resemble apologies without ever quite becoming one. I let her keep the house. Not out of forgiveness, exactly out of the understanding that some debts are better held quietly than called in completely. My father taught me that too, in the end. Power isn't only about what you take. It's about what you choose not to. Brianna Vance, I heard through channels I still maintain out of old habit, left the logistics industry entirely. Started over somewhere smaller, somewhere her father's name couldn't reach far enough to keep bailing her out. I don't think about her often. She was never really the point. She was just the mistake that finally showed me the shape of the man I'd married. And for that, in some strange and unsentimental way, I suppose I owe her nothing but the truth. She thought she was stealing a husband. She was actually just handing a queen back her crown. Some nights, sitting in the study that used to be Julian's before it became entirely mine, I think about the version of myself who sat at that dinner table 6 years ago and said nothing while a stranger called her restful. I don't regret her. She was patient because she believed patience was the price of love, and she was wrong only about the ending, not the instinct. Love was never supposed to cost me my name. I flipped a table once, in a fit of fury I'd been holding back for 6 years, and the whole architecture of a man's carefully built life came apart at the seams because of it. People ask me sometimes, carefully, the way you ask a question you're not sure you're allowed to ask, whether I regret how far I let it go the company, the board, the headlines, the custody threat that never should have made it as far as it did. I don't. I regret only the 6 years before it. The years I spent making myself smaller, so a man who never deserved the effort could feel bigger standing next to me. I won't spend another 6 years like that. Neither, I intend to make sure, will my son. He didn't know who he was living with. I made certain, by the time it was over, that no one in this city would ever make that mistake about me again.